Hello, my name is Deborah Kavanaugh Grant, Local Food Systems and Small Farms Educator with the University of Illinois Extension. The topic for discussion is Illinois Cottage Food Law. The objectives for this presentation include an increased knowledge of what is a cottage food operation, increased knowledge of cottage food operator requirements, increased knowledge of what products can be sold, and increased awareness of resources and organizations that provide information and support. The topics that we will cover will include history of cottage food in Illinois, what is a cottage food operation, what kind of foods can be sold, what foods are not permitted, labeling requirements, and resources. On August 16, 2011, Governor Quinn signed into law Senate Bill 840, the Illinois Local Food Entrepreneur and Cottage Food Operation Act, also known as the Cottage Food Bill. The Cottage Food Bill was a step in an ongoing effort to create policies that support the burgeoning local food movement. The Cottage Food Bill created new opportunities for farmers to engage in value-added processing while making it easier for aspiring entrepreneurs to start new local food businesses selling at one of Illinois' 300-plus farmers markets. The Cottage Food Bill changed Illinois' food safety laws to allow homemade, non-potentially hazardous baked goods, jams and jellies, fruit butter, dried herbs, and dried tea blends to be sold at farmers markets provided they were properly labeled as homemade products, annual gross receipts from sales were $25,000 or less, the cottage food operation was registered, and the person preparing and selling the food had a valid Illinois Food Service Sanitation Manager certificate. SB 840 was sponsored by Senator David Kaler of Peoria and Representative Lisa Dugan of Kankakee. On January 1, 2012, Illinois Cottage Food Law officially went into effect. On July 30, 2015, Governor Bruce Rauner signed into law HB 2486, the Cottage Food Law Expansion Bill. HB 2486 became Public Act 99-0191 and made the following changes to the existing Illinois Cottage Food Law. Expanded where cottage food products can be sold from just farmers markets to include on-farm, farm stands, and CSAs for cottage food products where the signature or featured ingredient was produced on the farm. Increase the gross receipt threshold of exempt food from $25,000 to $36,000. Authorize the Illinois Farmers Market Task Force to develop an expanded list of allowed cottage food products. Remove the previous explicit prohibition against rhubarb, tomato, and pepper jams and jellies, provided that they must be tested and documented as non-potentially hazardous jams and jellies with a pH equilibrium of less than 4.6. Allowed for a cottage food operation to have employees, not longer limited to just family members. Eliminated the requirement that those selling the cottage food products have a food sanitation manager certificate. Now just the person preparing and packaging the products needs the certificate. Exempted religious, charitable, and nonprofit bake sale fundraisers from the overall Food Handling Regulation Act. And I'd like to thank the Illinois Stewardship Alliance for their efforts on both the Illinois Local Food Entrepreneur and Cottage Food Operation Act and the Cottage Food Law Expansion Bill. What is a cottage food operation? A cottage food operation is a business operated by a person at the farmer's market, on-farm, farm stands, and CSAs who produces or packages non-potentially hazardous food in a kitchen of that person's primary domestic residence for direct sale by the owner, family member, or employee. The food is stored in the residence where the food is made. No prior inspection or use of a certified kitchen is required. The name and residence of the person preparing and selling products as a cottage food operation is registered with the County Health Department of a unit of local government where the cottage food operation resides. A fee may be charged for registration. The person preparing and packaging products as a cottage food operation has a current Department of Public Health approved Food Service Sanitation Management certificate. Items sold by a cottage food operation are intended for end use only. Gross receipts from the sale of food exempted under the cottage food law may not exceed $36,000 in a calendar year. Products can't be resold to retail stores, restaurants, on the internet, by mail order, to wholesalers, brokers, or other food distributors who resell food. Fruits are naturally high in food acid. Only high acid jams, jellies, and preserves made from the following fruits are permitted: apple, apricot, grape, peach, plum, quince, orange, nectarine, tangerine, blackberry, raspberry, blueberry, boysenberry, cherry, cranberry, strawberry, red currants, rhubarb, tomato, pepper, or a combination of those fruits. This year's Cottage Food Law Expansion Bill removed the explicit prohibition against rhubarb, tomato, and pepper jams and jellies, provided that they must be tested and documented as non-potentially hazardous jams and jellies with a pH equilibrium of less than 4.6. What about low sugar jams and jellies? The best practice for low sugar jams and jellies, or those using sugar substitute, is that they be processed only in a boiling water canner for a minimum of 10 minutes and not by any other methods unless water activity is determined by a commercial lab to be less than 0.85. What about other flavors? Any other jams, jellies, or preserves not listed may be produced by a cottage food operation, provided their recipe has been tested and documented by a commercial laboratory as containing a pH level equilibrium of less than 4.6. Only high-acid fruit butters are permitted. Fruit butters made from apple, apricot, grape, peach, plum, quince, and prune. Any other fruit butter not listed may be produced by a cottage food operation, provided their recipe has been tested and documented by a commercial laboratory as containing pH of less than 4.6 and water activity of less than 0.85. Under Illinois' cottage food law, you are also able to sell dry herbs, dry herb blends, and dry tea blends. Baked goods are permitted under cottage food, such as, but not limited to, breads, cookies, cakes, fruit pies, and pastries. Here's the fruit pies that are permitted: high-acid fruit pies made of apple, apricot, grape, peach, plum, quince, orange, nectarine, tangerine, blackberry, raspberry, blueberry, boysenberry, cherry, cranberry, strawberry, red currants, or a combination of these fruits. The fruit pies not listed may be produced by a cottage food operation, provided their recipe has been tested by a commercial laboratory and documented by the laboratory as containing a pH equilibrium of less than 4.6. Foods not permitted to be manufactured for sale by a cottage food operation include any potentially hazardous food, as defined by the 2009 Food and Drug Administration Food Code or subsequent amendments. That includes, but is not limited to, meat products, dairy products, canned vegetables, pickled products, raw seed sprouts, and generally any food item that requires time and temperature control for food safety are not permitted. Jams, jellies, and preserves, watermelon jellies or jams are not permitted. Fruit butters, pumpkin, banana, and pear butters are not permitted. Baked goods, pumpkin pie, sweet potato pie, cheesecake, custard pies, cream pies, and pastries with potentially hazardous fillings or toppings are not permitted. Here's a chart that lists potentially hazardous foods according to the Federal Food and Drug Administration 2009 Food Code. Potentially hazardous foods in general means a food that requires time and proper temperature control to keep it safe and reduce the risk of spoilage, pathogenic microorganism growth, or toxin formation. In accordance with the FDA 2009 Food Code, potentially hazardous food does not include a food item that, because of its high acid, pH, and or lack of water, is designated as a non-potentially hazardous food or non-temperature controlled food. All products must be labeled. The food packaging must conform to the labeling requirements of the Illinois Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act and include the following information on each of its products. The name and address of the cottage food operation, not a post office box, and no out-of-state operations. The common or usual name of the food product and weight, net weight and metric weight. All ingredients of the food product, including any colors, artificial flavors, and preservatives. Ingredients must be listed in descending order by weight using common or usual names. Sub-ingredients need to be listed as well. Example, soy sauce, wheat, soybeans, or salt. Allergen labeling as specified in federal labeling requirements. The date the product was processed or prepared. The label may be handwritten or printed large enough to be easily read. And lastly, at the point of sale, a placard is displayed in a prominent location that states the following. This product was produced in a home kitchen, not subject to public health inspection, that may also process common food allergens. A cottage food operation label must identify if any of the ingredients are made from one of the following food groups: milk, eggs, wheat, peanuts, soybeans, fish, crustacean or shellfish, and tree nuts. Identify which nut, i.e. almonds, and any ingredient made from these food groups. An example, if the cottage food operation is making wheat bread, they have the following two options. Include the allergen in the ingredient list. For example, a white bread with the following ingredient listings: whole wheat flour, water, salt, and yeast. In this example, the statement whole wheat flour is the allergen, and this statement meets the requirements of federal law. Include an allergen statement with the word contains after the ingredient list. For example, a white bread with the following ingredients: whole wheat flour, water, sodium caseinate, salt, and yeast. Contains wheat and milk. The contains statement must include all the allergens found in the product. Here's an example of a cottage food label. It needs to include the following: name and address, common name of the food product, all ingredients listed in descending order by weight using common names listing sub-ingredients, allergen labeling as specified in federal labeling requirements, date the product was processed or prepared, and your label may be handwritten. Remember that you are required to display at the point of sale a placard in a prominent location that states the following: this product was produced in a home kitchen not subject to public health inspection that may also process common food allergens. The cottage food operation must have an Illinois Department of Public Health approved Food Service Sanitation Manager certificate. The name and residence of the person preparing and selling products as a cottage food operation must be registered with the health department of a unit of local government where the cottage food operation resides. If the Illinois Department of Public Health or a unit of local government has received a consumer complaint or has reason to believe that an imminent health hazard exists, or that a cottage food operations product has been found to be misbranded, adulterated, or not in compliance with the cottage food law, then it may invoke cessation of sales until it deems that the situation has been addressed. A state-certified local public health department may, upon providing a written statement to the Illinois Department of Public Health, take the additional regulatory measures. Require that as part of the registration, a cottage food operation must agree to grant access to the local public health department to conduct an inspection of the cottage food operation in the event of a consumer complaint or foodborne illness outbreak. In the event of a consumer complaint or foodborne illness, a local health department is allowed to inspect the premises of the cottage food operation in question and set a reasonable fee for that inspection. To make things easier for potential cottage food operations, the University of Illinois Extension has put together a cottage food guide that describes what the law does and doesn't allow and what you have to do to qualify to become a cottage food operation. The Illinois Department of Public Health has created Technical Information Bulletin number 44 for local health departments and potential cottage food operators. In order to answer some additional questions, the Illinois Department of Public Health has also created a supplemental Cottage Food Technical Information Bulletin number 44B. As of the date of this recording, August 2/15, these two Illinois Department of Public Health documents do not include revisions of the Cottage Food Law Expansion Bill. We defined a cottage food operation as a person who produces or packages non-potentially hazardous food in a kitchen of that person's primary domestic residence for direct sale at the farmer's market, on farm, farm stands, and CSA by the owner, family member, or employee, stored in the residence where the food is made. We learned that foods prepared for sale by a cottage food operation include only non-potentially hazardous jams, jellies, and preserves, fruit butters, baked goods, dry herbs, dry herb blends, and dry tea blends intended for end-use consumption. We learned that any potentially hazardous food, as defined by the Food and Drug Administration Food Code or subsequent amendments, is prohibited from being produced and sold under the cottage food law. We also learned about the labeling requirements. Lastly, we learned about resources and the recommendations that if you are planning on starting a cottage food operation, you should read and review Technical Information Bulletin number 44 and Technical Information Bulletin number 44A. In addition, it is highly recommended that you reach out to your local health department early and start a conversation about your cottage food related plans. See the URL above with the listing of local Illinois health departments.